Blessings and welcome back to our 28th episode in our journey through the zodiacal faces. I'm Elsa. I'm joined today again by brilliant astrologers KB Dayton and David Fisher. We are here for Capricorn 1, and the dates for this decan are December 21st or 22nd through December 30th or 31st. So happy solstice, Yule, happy holidays to y'all, and a happy new year as well, because we will probably get to you, just as the new year comes for the Capricorn 2 video. And happy birthday, Capricorns! All right, so to jump right in, Austin Coppock calls this a headless body. T. Susan Chang calls this the difference engine. And the Hermetic name for the minor arcana is the Lord of Harmonious Change. So that would be the Two of Pentacles, which is our little minor arcana for the day. And we have Saturn, of course, ruling the larger sign of Capricorn. And so that will be represented by the Lord of the Gates of Matter, which is our devil card. So the devil card will be with us through the entire decan. I know we have the universe or the world representing Saturn proper, but the devil card here is the Capricornian card, Saturnine Capricornian card. So we also now have Jupiter in service of Capricorn for this particular decan. So we've got the Wheel of Fortune again, which is the Lord of the forces of life. And as you guys might have noticed, I mentioned in the last video in Sagittarius 3, we had Saturn serving Jupiter, which I had mentioned to come, that at this turning point of the solstice or moment of the shift of the dark to light, we have Saturn ruling, or Saturn in service of Jupiter in the last decan, and then here we have Jupiter in service of Saturn. And that's the only time that this will happen in the 36 decans where we have that particular shift in energy that works that way, which I think it's just good to note. And in thinking about it, I kind of just wanted to bring to you guys' attention that they're both the day planets, right? So there is some working together, and they are both the greater planets. So we've got the greater benefic and the greater malefic, but kind of coming together in the day team to work maybe at odds, but in some ways working together, I'd say. David had also said that he, when we were talking about this, and if you want to elaborate on it, David, you can feel free, but just how Jupiter in service to Saturn seems a little bit nicer than Saturn in service to Jupiter in some ways.
Not in the terms of Saturn is the larger orbit or the all-encompassing sphere within the planetary sphere scheme in that Chaldean order. So Jupiter, yes, Jupiter is also an external planet, an outer planet, but it is below Saturn, and Saturn is the limit in terms of visibility. Of course, you can see Uranus from certain parts of the world, but from certain parts of the world at certain times of the year. So come on, give me a break. And you have Saturn being fully visible there, but just about. And when Saturn is in Jupiter's realm, you see a planet that has to deal with things in a slower pace, that has to deal with things in a more concerned manner, like detail-oriented manner, dealing with everything, having to deal with everything that doesn't like that type of attitude. So it's not as comfortable. So again, before we had a lot of impetus, we had a lot of willpower, we had a lot of manifesting, fire. And with Saturn and Temperance together there, we had this idea of putting limits to that impulsive creation. Here is getting some impulse for creation from the fact that you have structured limits, from the fact that you have limits, that you have boundaries to respect, and learning how to use that within reality too. Again, we're taking back to that idea of Taurus that we discussed about being safe within circumstance. Here is being acutely aware of that flow of circumstance. More into that in a minute.
Yeah, and I feel the same way in a way where it's like in Sagittarius 3, we have this large expanse and we have to get the arrow to like the middle of the target. So Saturn is there to sort of narrow the path. So we have this large, big like expanse, and we could have all these things like with this second decan of Sagittarius 2 with the moon. You've just got multiplicity, and then you get Saturn at the third decan of Sagittarius where the path narrows. And here you have Saturn, sort of the Lord of darkness, the Lord of death, the devil. It's about material. So it brings you, and now we're into this earth sign, the last of the earth signs. So you're looking at like this matured earth realm in a way, and you're looking at a feminine earth realm. So you're really looking at matter and material. And when you're looking at matter and material, and Jupiter shows up as the in service to that, is the Lord of that, is the co-ruler of that. It's almost like it gives those little jovial benefits. So it's like if you're trying to like create something stable and long lasting, and you've already narrowed the path, you know what you want, and now you have to work to get it. Jupiter there in service, it's not just like, oh, we have all this and the path is like narrowing and it's kind of shitty. It's like, in this way, we're like happy to be in the material realm, and Jupiter is in service of that, right? Like giving its little, benefic boons or something. Or like
it is, although Jupiter, again, is an energy of expansion, and it doesn't like to be a narrow path. It's actually something that Jupiter is appalled by is structure. So Jupiter is not the type of guy like Mercury and Saturn that really like to define things to the exactness. Jupiter doesn't worry about that at all. It's just about the experience. It's like, okay, do I experience it as such? I will call it as such. I will.
Is that really though, David? Because Jupiter is law and order within it. You know what I'm saying? Like Jupiter is church and law and order.
Well, it signifies those things, but in another sense, like the of Jupiter is to allow you to have that embodied expansion sense, So these spiritual leaders, the law, in an ideal form, they allow us to be ourselves and to understand ourselves and achieve more of ourselves and expand ourselves. That sounds a bit Saturnian in that sense, in that larger sense. But personally, in an individual's character, Jupiter is characterized by this impulse to expand oneself that doesn't account for the details, just for the goodness of the experience of like, I feel like this is validating to me. I don't have to think too much about it, the ease of the benefics. So yes, there is that side of Jupiter that you were mentioning, but I was referring to a more personal level of experience of that particular planet.
And when you describe that, you're talking almost about the sensory space, which brings me back to the devil card of like how Saturn and Jupiter work together in this decan, which is we're going through, like the spirit is coming through these filters of the planetary spheres until it is stripped away or completely embodied by the flesh, right? And that's what we see as far as like the devil, which we'll get into. But it's like as we move through those spheres, we sort of lose more and more consciousness, and then we're just stuck in this place of matter, which I think Jupiter in service of matter here would allow you to be able to experience a sensation, right? You're talking about the experiential level of a person, right? So you're experiencing something greater with inside of matter. So it's no longer just pleasure seeking and money making. It can be something that can transcend, look at the shadow, to me,
it's the connections, the positive reinforcement of who I think I am. So you will look for those groups of people, you will look for those belief systems, ideologies that will allow you to live your experience to the most conscious, to the best of your conscious ability, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that is a lot of the hope in the Devil card, is that we can take the earth-bound experiences and bring consciousness to them in order to sort of like integrate the shadow, essentially, which I think we'll talk more about. So,
I wanted to say something real quick too that we haven't mentioned yet, which is that Jupiter is in the sign of its stability here. It's in Capricorn, which is opposite its exaltation of Cancer. And so this is also important because even despite that, it's still a little bit of a better and more comfortable situation for Jupiter to be answering to Saturn here. T. Susan Chang mentions in her chapter in 36 Secrets about this decan is the very interesting pattern that at all the solar points of the year, so each solstice and equinox, we have a 10 at the end of a suit leading into a 2, the beginning of another suit. So we had that at from Gemini 3 into Cancer 1, because that was the summer solstice. Now we have it at Sagittarius 3 leading into Capricorn 1. So
yeah, and as we go through the decans, we begin to see that patterns emerge, right? Like now we have a polar opposite, and now we have opposite decans, and we have sort of these emergences of like, oh, I see that this happens in the formula or whatever. And speaking of which, the 2s, they represent, or they refer to Chokmah. I'm sorry, my tree of life, or my Hebrew pronunciation is terrible, on the tree of life. So it rules the first decans, 2s. We're talking about the 2s here. They rule the first decans of the cardinal signs, where the zodiacal points of the 4 seasons begin. So that's interesting, right? And the elements here are in their original or harmonious conditions. And again, that's the 2s, talking about them being uncontaminated by outside influence. The 2s in all the 4 suits imply the initiation of power of the 4 elements. So we're initiating essentially with the 2 today, with the 2 of coins or the 2 of pentacles, we're initiating the element of earth at its like primal, most basic. So sorry, I don't need to read the rest of those. So just, yeah, that I'll just cut that part like when I'm done with saying the 2 thing.
Oh, so when we have the 2s, again, we're referring to the idea, calls back to the idea of the high priestess. I wanted to mention that. And the moon. And what is it, primarily what that signifies is the idea of multiplicity or opposition or confronting things that one thing confronting another, one thing coming to be because or while something else ceases to be, that movement of opposites. The moon signifies that kind of dichotomy.
Also reflection, right? So when we're talking about the devil card, we're talking about really integrating the shadow, because we're talking about like the carnal and the material and things like that. And when we're talking about the moon, we're also talking about the material realm. So
yes, and what I wanted to say with this, the opposition piece and regarding the 2s, is that with this 2 of in a cardinal quality, we have this coming to grip with the reality that the earth, the material realm, for us to initiate action in it, we need to be able to engage with the dance of the material. Like, for instance, if you want to invest your money in stocks or anything like that, the 2 of Pentacles is a card that represents that. Like, you have to know how to invest, when to invest, where to invest, because you have to know the flow of that thing that by nature is speculative, as nature itself is ever changing. And we can only hope to adapt to its patterns. And we call this society and our laws and all of that.
Yeah, and just like the two of coins kind of reflect each other, and it's about like trade and kind of like getting a leg up or something. Just the idea of the reflection of the two coins, the reflection of the moon as it's a shadow of the reflection of the sun. And we would think that the devil card or Saturn is sort of the shadow side of the sun or the moon or something like this. So there's a lot of that kind of like contrast of shadow and light and integrating the shadow. And just like with the Two of Pentacles, like them reflecting each other. Like sometimes they'll say it's like two jobs or two incomes or, you know, two ships coming in or something like this. But it's really kind of a reflection of where also we put our material resources. Almost like if the twos are reflecting the unbridled elements, it makes me think of the magician, right? Who's got some ability to harness or look at materia in a movable way, which, you know, this being super cardinal is very much like starting out, right? And so are the twos as well. So I think that's also interesting. I'm going to jump into Austin Coppock's 36 Faces here and some of my notes, and we'll see what he has to say.
So before we jump into Austin's piece, I would like to read a little something that Austin brought up once talking about Saturn in an astrology podcast episode. And I would like to bring it up just because it's so fun and kind of brings the energy of Saturn. It goes, it's a little verse that goes. My children are envious. I'm sorry. My children are vicious, dry, and old, envious, weary, wretched, cold. Deep eyes, hard skin, their beards are small. They're lame, mishappen, depraved withal. Treacherous, brooding, greedy, pale, they often find themselves in jail. They grab the dirt, dig graves, plow land. In foul and stinking clothes they stand. Condemned to die or live in sorrow, sweat and strain or trouble borrow. Always needy, never free. It's Saturn's children, there you see. So I just wanted to call to attention all of these nice characteristics attributed to people who have Saturn influencing their chart heavily, which all three of us here have. So we're wicked like that.
We're wicked like that. Also, since, I mean, I wasn't planning to read this, but the verse that is in the Pythagorean tarot, because there's verses, is kind of exemplifying the devil card or Saturn. The master of the melting blaze creates material things and draws together mates in a hot embrace. He works from the depths obscure. To bring him to the light is the only cure. Reveal and seize the force he radiates. To 36 Faces. In the first phase of Capricorn, it entails the descent of the spirit into the body of the world itself. One sinks into the bones of the world, deeper into materiality than at any point previous. The level of identification with gross matter shocks the perception. The more subtle levels can easily be forgotten in this process. The head is forgotten as consciousness descends. In the Libra Hermetis, it offers us an image of a decapitated man holding his own head in his right hand. And as the headless one of the Greek magical papyri declares, I am the headless one with sight in my feet, which I think is really interesting because we have like the goat horned one or the hooved one here. And it's interesting with sight in my feet, right? It's such a grounded, earthy type of experience.
But also, you were talking about like decapitation or decapitated figure. Mm-hmm. In Vedic astrology or in Hindu astrology or in sidereal astrology even, or actually in Vedic astrology, you have the Mula Nakshatra, which is the lunar mention called Mula in the beginning of sidereal Sagittarius, which would correspond to this particular decan nowadays, has some meanings that kind of that I know about superficially that evoke what you were calling like the depth of consciousness, the consciousness going into its own depths to explore itself, in a way.
And I like the idea with the sight in the feet too, of like, again, like we're going to be talking as a main theme, or at least I'm going to be talking as a main theme about bringing consciousness to matter.
Mula means root. You're talking about the feet. Mula means root as
right.
well.
Yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the Muladhara is like the base chakra or something like this, right? So yes, Pada means feet technically, but yes, same vein. So with sight in my feet, I feel like it reminds me of like walking meditation, or like taking your socks off and walking in the grass. Just again, like how sensory that can be and how much consciousness can be in the feet, or even like we worship the feet of the guru, right? Just like sight in my feet. It just seems like such an earthy, kind of like beautiful metaphor for, the connection to the earth or the material realm that the devil kind of conjures up for us. So in an obscure fragmentary Greek text, the 36 Days of the Zodiac, which he mentions and we've been mentioning throughout our Decanic journey, it attributes this Decanic portion to Asclepius, the god of healing. So to heal the body, we must descend into its full density, and we come to inhabit our flesh that we might heal it. Meanwhile, the planetary ruler, according to the descending order, which is Jupiter, which is the one we're using here, suggests that a descent into the material realm in order to redeem it. So again, that's like bringing consciousness to matter vibes. So if Taurus is to fructify, or, the fruits of the earth in Taurus, or Virgo is to sort of perfect the harvest. In Capricorn, this is what it's hilarious, Austin. In Capricorn, we fall down, down, down into order to rule and redeem.
To rule and redeem in the sense like tax collector, for instance?
I mean, I think the idea of Capricorn, we fall down, down, down in order to rule and redeem is kind of like, if I
rule and redeem in a sense of putting boundaries around something. Like a tax collector goes there and it exerts the power of the king to get what it's due, to make the country keep running, to keep the country running or something.
I mean, yeah, you could definitely look at it like a tax collector. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking about like redeeming like the shadow consciousness, or to rule or to master the materiality kind of a vibe.
Some of the things that you're talking about sound very Jupiterian to me as well. Both with this this Wheel of Fortune element of rising and falling. Like, yes, we do go down, down, down at some point, but then the redemption that you're talking about is very
and Jupiter is like redemptive, right? So it's like the idea of the fact that we fall into the material realm, we forget everything, but yet the whole idea is to bring consciousness that like redeems it, or like to integrate the shadow. You're sort of like redeemed in that sense. And to rule, I mean, both Saturn and Jupiter are kings, right? They both rule. And I feel like, Jupiter gives I guess if we didn't have Jupiter at some point, like in this decan, it would just sink into the material. We wouldn't have the opportunity or the gift or the guru or what the consciousness or whatever it is to like transform and redeem the material realm, essentially.
I also, though, wanted to say, even before you got to that point, talking about the eyes and the feet as a way of kind of like feeling into grounding the sensory experience. The feet are in medical astrology associated with the sign of Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is also associated with like travel, walking distances, going broad distances, expansive for long periods of time. So I think that those things too, just again, sound very Jupiterian to me.
That's why I say Saturn and Jupiter, in a way, they kind of have a beautiful, I guess polarity, because we've got the day team like representing like polar opposites, but also you think of like the feet on the earth, and you think about like plowing and tilling and like working the earth and being one with the earth or being a part of it, or the fact that the body has to interact with the earth in some type of way to make a journey, to grow anything at all. I mean, if Saturn is agriculture, then what is the hope of a good harvest or something like this, you know? So in a way, they work well together.
Elsa and I both have, I'm not sure if I should share this, but I'm sharing that. Elsa and I both have Jupiter in this decan, not domicile, but in its own decan. And this is true for most people with Jupiter and Capricorn, but in this decan in particular, I think initial experience would be more like getting your hopes torn down. So you would expect from circumstance certain things that are not necessarily all that it can give you, but it's just good enough that you will be able to make it. And this is where it gets impressive for the fall of Jupiter to make it to a good stage, or to a good state, I'm sorry, because it's like from something that was really harsh to make it happen, you know, from
yeah, I think Jupiter and Capricorn also can be like making the most of small blessings, like not having a lot and not getting a lot or something like this. But when you do get those little boons or those little windfalls, you can take advantage of them. If, you know, I mean, if you're not too stuck in the material, again, I think integrating the shadow, you know, for a Saturnine person, it's kind of like not slow and steady wins the race, but kind of just like they don't expect to get anything but what you work for, or like hard work or something like that, right? It's like
you get your hopes on material things that are workable.
Yeah, it's
right?
kind of like for a Saturnine person, they're just like, well, I work my entire life till I die, and I have little stores of food, and that's just what I do. I get up every year, I plow the fields, you know, that kind of a thing. And then Jupiter in that case, you know, could give little boons or little cachets to those who have their nose to the grindstone, or who work hard or something like this, right? So I think there's a little bit of that.
And the appreciation for the process, right? For the appreciation, like the hope from seeing that the steps are being fulfilled in the expected manner, right? That very earthy step-by-step kind of thing of, oh, look, I was able to plow the land without any interruptions. This is a good thing. And then you keep going and you draw your energy from the small successes that you have. Yeah,
and I think also Saturn is about having very low expectations as well, like not expecting
ground expectations.
Not expecting much at all except for suffering from the material world. And I think that concept of not expecting anything but suffering is like it can lead to a really beautiful spiritual process, which I think is like the Lord of the forces of life, right? So if you're at the gates of matter and you're like, you know, all this matter isn't giving me anything, and I'm not expecting anything, I'm just expecting more work and more suffering and more poverty or whatever, and like to reconcile that, to understand that that's not necessarily a shadow side, it's a reality of life, then you get to that kind of idea, that Jupiterian like spiritual idea of, oh, if matter is fleeting and life is suffering, then what, right? So it leads to a little bit of like transcendence in that way, I suppose. But, you know, like this powerful beast, right? This Capricornian horned one, Pan, the great god. It's a lot about like food, sex, territory, what's mine, my things, my matter, all that, which we can see kind of in the, I guess, traditions around this period of time where it's like dark, but you have the one star, or the hope that guides you forward, or you just have like eat, drink, and be merry. But then you have the idea of like gifting, or like, you know, like little tiny Tim and Scrooge or something like that. Idea kind of seems a little bit like that Jupiterian / Saturnine thing, because Saturn can also hoard, and it can also be like poverty. But then Jupiter is the idea of like gifting the little that you might have to someone else, and just like the smile on their face is all that's needed or something. So I think, you know, just like, Saturnalia, or Yule or Christmas, or all these things are kind of like those stories kind of show us that Saturnine Jupiter quality, where it's like the darkness and the lack, and then what a small little gift could bring. Like the idea of even Santa Claus, right, in the beginning was kind of like I'm not going to go into like all the cool like conspiracy around, or not conspiracy, but like the lore around like Santa and the mushroom and all this, but like originally it was like giving a little piece of fruit, like giving an apple or something. And that was like a huge deal. To get like an apple in the middle of like winter was almost impossible, right, in certain areas that these myths come from, like a cold area.
I think we should actually explore just a little bit more for people who might not be familiar with the myth of Pan and like what figure Pan was in mythology, because
as in Peter?
not Peter, but it's interesting how that, whatever, what would you call it? The progression resulted in a Pan type figure, because Pan was a basically side character. No, he was like a supporting role to Dionysus or Bacchus, and the parties that were essentially named for Saturn, Saturnalia, which were raucous affairs in the middle of winter. But Pan, in some ways, has that trickster energy, completely amoral, not bad, not evil, not good, just super, super trickster. And furthermore, if you think about it from pre-current patriarchal capitalist times, this
or
kind of
Christian or Islamic,
Christian or Islam, like Christo-fascist, whatever we are in now, we see that Pan was kind of a counterpart to the goddess, actually. Like the materia that you talk about, Elsa, the just straight up fertile masculine is Pan, represented by symbols including the goat, and the trickster energy and everything. There's a place for that, and it has been shoveled into this much more negative image of the devil that we often see now depicted on these tarot cards, especially, that we're going to look at.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Pan is the great horned one, right? And it's literally where Pan is literally where we get where the Christian, not where we, but the Christianity, they literally took a pagan god and made it into the devil. So there's that. And also the quote unquote devil, or Pan, was always hanging out with like nymphs and was a very sexual, he was known to be like incredibly sexual. And like
goat.
Yeah, exactly. And also I wanted to bring up the idea of the scapegoat, right? Because when you think about the scapegoat, you often think of Saturnine people, like they're off on the distance, or even like Pan, right? Or the devil. It's the scapegoat for Christianity, right?
And if you ever met a Capricorn, you know that they are scapegoated, but also kinky as shit.
I mean, it is the Lord of the gates of matter, right? And so it's like thinking things like drinking and, having sex or something like this is like a basic form of creation that should be honored and made sacred, is definitely a part of it. And it's definitely scapegoated off into things that, you shouldn't do, or that are ugly or taboo or something like this. But it wasn't necessarily always thought of like that. And then you also have, Pan, or the great horned one, as having, in some cases, like a tongue coming out of the belly, or an erect phallus or something like this, which comes from it comes from the idea of like that pre-Pan, Shiva and Shakti energy. So it's like unbridled, like masculine, phallic qualities of creation, of seeding life. But also the goat, or the great horned one, or the devil in tarot, is also seen as having breasts. The idea of like that Shiva Shakti, or the kind of like gender fluid kind of sexuality, say something about it. But otherwise, the devil is both like human and beast and God in one, with the idea of Pan. And it represents like our instincts and our appetites and our drives. But in nature, we have this component of our psyche that's mostly unconscious, and it operates behind our backs. So that's the idea of like having to confront that shadow, or the idea of, you know, not to deny it or destroy it, but to acknowledge it as a part of ourselves, to understand its nature and its sort of movement towards good, right? Like, we wouldn't be able to have this kind of earth school type of vibe, or this reincarnation process, if it wasn't for like spirit being able to play in the forms of matter and descend into matter on some level, if there wasn't like a spirit living through the matter on earth as well.
Seeing the depths of yourself really shows you how to play circumstance. Like, when you learn what you're trying to avoid, your hidden patterns, in a way, when you have a way to consciously access them, you become very powerful over your shadow, over your own shadow. And so it can be really good to have, for instance, Jupiter in this deck and a benefic in this deck, and Venus, the moon, not the moon in particular, but if it's a waxing moon in the day chart or something where it's in a nice enough, it won't be so bad for you, you know, even if it's debilitated there in Capricorn. In a few ways, because it will teach you how to get in touch with that dark side of yourself in a way that is more hopeful, more positive, in a way that revives your spirit and allows you to judge yourself in like another light. It's like you're not trying to avoid that thing anymore. You face it and you integrate it, you know?
Yeah, and from the Pythagorean, like Katie was saying before, like the shadow or the trickster or the material or Pan, you know, the goat god, the cloven one or whatever. It's not like good or evil. And that's the way the diamond was thought of. And the diamond was also thought of as like a person's divinity. And it was prior to morality. So it's not like this dualistic thing like we think about it now. So I think it's just interesting to kind of broaden our perception around what material is. And I know we do that when it comes to Mercury and the magician, right? About mastery over the elements. But here we're sort of, we have the opportunity to be completely clothed or bound in matter and to build upon that in certain ways. So we all know that that can be pretty treacherous and pretty sticky and a little bit of a trap for a lot of people, you know? So like tantric yoga, right? It's like considered to be like a hardcore path or like a advanced path or something, because in order to like dive into like alcohol and sex and like pleasure and like all those things, or even like worldly life in any way, it can really trap you. Just like the Two of Pentacles, right? It's like we're starting to build this material thing, and we can easily sort of, we could take it to the 10 of Pentacles, right? Where we have this beautiful, happy home and family. But if we sort of get caught, and a lot of people think of Capricorn this way too, right? Is like industrious and builder, like the builder, right? Or someone that's just like cutthroat and ruthless when it comes to business, or just like cold and calculated when it comes to like,
because the thing about when you deal with matter directly is that it will give you the reality, harsh, cold reality, whatever your judgments are. And Jupiter wants to play according to its own sense of reality. It's like, this is what I think, so I'm going to live by it, no questions asked. And Saturn is like, no, you're not. You're going to get karma, instant karma for your beliefs. So you can face your shadows and really work on yourself if your goal is to be just, if your goal is to be on top of reality. So people who have this decan emphasized in their charts would be faced with the cold, hard facts over and over since they were growing up. And they would develop this thick skin of being like, no, but I'm hopeful because I know that this kind of attitude in this particular context is invaluable because of my experience, you know, practical experience. I've lived it, so I know it.
And it adds, you know, it adds a jovial nature. It adds like a sense of humor. I think it adds like a buoyancy or a lightness to Saturn. Again, where we have this like Saturnalia, it was a big party. We have Santa who wants to drink and cookies and gift kids and, you know, even trick them, right? Give bad kids coal or whatever it is, right? Like this idea of being like sarcastic and witty and kind of buoyant with inside of the confines or the chains of material. I think we see here. Like, you know, you can get stuck in material for a long time, but to me, what, you know, Jupiter shows us, or that, you know, the Wheel of Fortune shows us, is that like you could be greedy like your whole life and just want to like make money or just want to build your empire or whatever, but at some point the light of Jupiter comes in and has you question that on some kind of a spiritual level. Even if it is just like what goes up must come down, like at the end of your life you're like, oh my god, all I did was make money and I didn't have relationships. Or again, I'm just thinking of like that Scrooge like thing, right, where you have this like change of heart at the end of life, or you're kind of realizing that all the drugs and sex and money, although it buys you like certain types of lovely experiences, those experiences entrap your soul, and there's something more just beyond just pleasure seeking that you can create through the material realm. So yeah, it offers, to me, it offers buoyancy, and it offers like that there's hope in the material realm, that there's something beyond just money and material and poverty and, you know, that kind of like cyclical nature that life is just a grind or whatever. I think that's all I have. So, you know, the Picatrix then, David, if you wanted to read it now, it's kind of interesting because the Picatrix gives us this jovial nature. The Picatrix gives us some good signification for this decan.
Yes, it goes. There rises in the first face of Capricorn a man with a reed in his right hand, and a hoopoe. Please put an emoji of a hoopoe on the comments below, if you know what that is, on his left hand. This is a happiness, joy, and bringing things to an end that are sluggish, weak, and proceeding poorly. This is its form. So again, this is the hoopoe. I don't know why it's called that. Maybe it's like a Pokemon that keeps saying hoopoe all the time. But this is what it looks like. It's cute.
I love it because it's like Saturn colors, like Saturn and Jupiter colors with like the black and white, but then with the gold, it's got that like Jupiter. It's like the colors of Saturn and Jupiter, which
it looks like a very chic person wearing a nice coat that I would totally design based on this. Look at that. It
does look like a Capricorn. It looks like it's like designer or whatever.
Designer, yes. Look at that hair. Look at the coat. Look at everything.
It's custom. Like every Capricorn that I know is like into like custom designer, like one of a kind, you know.
Bird couture. Bird
yeah.
couture.
Yeah.
Couture. No.
Couture. Couture. No.
Too much.
And, you know, there's one bird here with the slick back little thing on the top of its head, and the other one has it all floofed up. It's like two different ways to wear. Who wore it better, you know?
Who wore it best? Yes. Oh my god.
Unless anybody wanted to say anything about the Picatrix.
I'll say something about the Picatrix.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I just find that within the Picatrix, just giving it, what I should repeat it properly if I'm going to repeat it, but just giving it the face of happiness and joy, bringing things to an end that are sluggish, weak, and proceeding poorly. I think that's very, very interesting, right? Because it just shows like Jupiter's kind of rule or presence here. So it's happiness, joy. Again, that kind of like Santa, drink, eat, be merry, like mistletoe kind of Saturnalia vibe, where you're just like casting off the weight and casting off the darkness. In the middle of the tipping of the light, we're handing back the torch to the light or whatever. It just brings that like buoyancy. And then the idea of bringing things to an end that are sluggish or weak or proceeding poorly, of kind of that idea that we have of like the new year, right? Of just like cutting off all those things that are like not serving us, or, you know, like getting back to the routine, getting back to the gym. Like I think of like Saturn here, or Saturn Jupiter is like trimming the fat, or, the idea of like, oh, this just isn't working, let's just cut it out. Like this is just like both Jupiter and Saturn. Like if something's too slow and too sluggish and too weak, that's an excess of like Saturn. It's like, okay, these things are compostable now and dead. Or Saturn being like, okay, let's trim the fat a little bit. Let's hone this in a little bit. And how it's just like the face of happiness and joy.
But again, you see how Saturn is the ground where it's happening. We saw this in other decans. I mentioned this in other decans before, where the background is the nature of the sign. So we see Jupiter here fighting against sluggish things. A malefic that comes out as a good malefic in a person's chart is allowing you to remove things that stop you from achieving your higher purposes, whatever your heart intends to achieve. And Jupiter here allows you to be a better judge of what needs to crumble away for you to enjoy the better opportunities in life in that way.
Yeah, and I think again that's hopeful. The idea that we can compost the things that are sluggish or weak or haven't been working out, that gives you hope, and it also gives you lightness to have that joy and have that sort of like celebratory moment or have that true happiness. It's just like, you know, all this wasn't working out. You kind of do almost like that winter cleaning, like just getting rid of everything that doesn't, you know, serve you, and it makes you feel buoyant, it makes you feel hopeful, and like you have more to give when you sort of clear away the sludge.
I think that people will be able to connect with it when we say that there are many of us who, when something ends in our lives, when we put something to an end, we suffer a lot. Be it a relationship, a job, a home that you have to move from, anything. But these people who have this decan particularly emphasize, they feel the suffering in a different way. They will get hopeful out of that suffering because they somehow know, I got it, from circumstance that that fear is instigating something new. It comes before something new. And that's what people with this decan particularly emphasize. They feel learn from reality. And so they get hopeful, they get excited when these things are changing in a way. So they're able to get the best out of these transition periods because of that hopeful outlook.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us can identify with that around the holidays. Like the holidays are a joyous time, but they're also a super depressing time for a lot of people, like especially people that have suffered loss or even the loss of death, which we have to confront when we're looking at Saturn. And if you have someone in your life that has passed, the holidays can bring up their absence, right? And also bring up the gratitude that you have, which you have left or whatever. And I think that's a little Saturn-like as well. It's like, or Jupiter is like taking gratitude in the little things, or taking, you know, gratitude in what you do have versus what you don't have. But just the loss part as well is definitely there around the holidays for people. And I think that has a deep sort of resonance with that changing of the light. That's not just because it's the holidays, right? Like we're kind of mourning, like we're celebrating and mourning the year past. Like what have we done? What have we not gotten done? Look at how much time has passed. For a lot of people, that can be kind of a somber thing to look back and be like, oh, another year has passed, I'm another year older. And then also the hope that you can sort of like shed the past year and like start anew, right? People's New Year's resolutions or this idea. So again, like David was saying, if you're shedding a relationship or a house or whatever, we all know that feeling of, or a job, we all know that feeling of loss, but that kind of excited new hope for what the future has to bring. So yeah, this just exemplifies that really strongly. It's kind of baked in.
Yeah, remembering that this is the time of year that a lot of people are setting New Year's resolutions makes a lot of sense. It is setting expectations, which is a Jupiter thing for the next year, for the passage of time. Very, very appropriate for this decan.
And planning meals. And most people are frantically, here's the funny thing about it, is most people are frantically buying gifts right now. Like, not that they are, or like quick last minute, like prepping, like some people have bought their gifts in early December, but the idea of material here, right? Like you're buying gifts for all types of various reasons, not necessarily just because of like love and generosity. There's all these expectations and there's all this materialism sort of like baked into it as well. But yeah, the idea of giving to loved ones, and just the material of like what you have, really you come to a harsh face here with what you have, like whether it is you have to confront the family you have, or you have to confront the finances that you have, or you have to confront the actions that you've taken in the past year, or you have to confront a whole nother year of the climb, whether it's like the two, I'm thinking of the two of coins, like the material climb essentially. I think that's all relevant and kind of unmistakable at this time of year.
Totally.
Susan?
Yeah, let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen and show some tarot cards that are, I think, important to have some symbolism, have some things to say about the Devil, Wheel of Fortune, which is Jupiter's card, and then the Two of Coins. So we have a couple of depictions of the Devil up on the screen here, which might look familiar, especially based on what we've been talking about so far. We have the horned one, these depictions of the Devil too. The one in the middle is from the Scapini deck, and here you see there's both the mouth with the tongue coming out of the belly and the female's secondary sexual characteristics of breasts on this Devil. And in all three of these cards, Rider-Waite-Smith is on the left, the Michael Ulrich deck is on the right. You see these two figures, the masculine and the feminine, chained to the Devil. And, I think we might have mentioned this previously, but a lot of lore says that these are the lovers who are chained to the Devil based on their like carnal desires and their like sensory desires and things like this. So it's what it looks like.
And it's also the expectation, like you have the lovers that come together with like all this like, oh, it's just gonna be so like whatever, and then like 6 months later in the story or whatever, you have like all these expectations and all this sort of like karmic sludge that comes with trying to be with the other. Like a lot of people consider their relationships when they first start, like you see the lovers and the rainbow and it's like, oh, I found my my other half or whatever. And then a lot of people then consider their significant other like the bondage or the ball and chain. And it's like, yeah, we also know that the lovers here have these like bondages that are loose fitting. Everyone talks about this, that they could just easily take them off, right? Like we could easily sort of use consciousness to sort of take off this veil of illusion that is material, right? But we don't, and it's harder than it seems. And you really realize that when you're faced with the opposition of the other, and just how, people that are always like, oh, I want a relationship, and then they get in the relationship and they're like, oh my god, I'm bound to this other person.
You have to be careful what you
way. Yeah. So I think it just kind of shows what the material pressure, because Saturn is also this like pressurized thing. And if you think of like even the husband and wife like giving a diamond, right, where it's like this pressurized jewel, you see that the material circumstance presses upon the ideal in a way and binds us in some type of a way.
Yeah, that's very important to remember, the compression piece here, because we'll see in conjunction with the Wheel of Fortune, which is Jupiter, which is expansion, we get what T. Susan Chang calls this decan, which is the difference engine. So it's kind of that combustibility that happens when the force of Saturn and Jupiter come together. And I have a couple other pictures of the Devil here. One of them on the left is from the Pythagorean deck that we referenced earlier. We have a lot of phallic symbolism there. We also have the goat hooves, which you also see on the previous slide. A few depictions of the Devil often include bestial lower halves. which I think is also related to Pan, who was often, what are they called? A satyr?
Yeah,
Satyr.
like a goat
Satyr.
god. Yeah,
Yeah.
a goat god, like man on top and goat on bottom, which I also think is really interesting because we just came from Sagittarius, which we have man on top, horse on bottom.
Yep.
And now we have Capricorn, which is man on top, goat on bottom, or man on top, fish on bottom.
Right. Goat
So
on top.
I think those two flanking each other, being part man, part animal, is, we shouldn't just skip over that. I guess it's important.
Definitely. So that's on the left, and then on the right we have the Mother Peace deck, and this is a depiction of the devil that really makes me think of the way in which, as we talked about just a few moments ago, what the devil has been kind of shoehorned into a certain quite negative meaning based on the culture that we live in, the times that we live in. This is a depiction of hierarchy, of the shadow side of the sort of sensory seeking of the devil, of the, you know, wanting to have physical cravings and wanting to appease those physical cravings. We have who is actually the emperor at the top of this Byzantine, where he's ordering people around, and everybody below him is in chains. They're all gifting up to him, including a woman on the bottom who is giving her child up through the chains. There's just sacrifice all for the emperor here in this card. And, you know, the thing that I really like about this card, in addition to it just being a very interesting way to think about the devil, is that it makes it very clear that the counterpart, or I guess the opposite of the devil, is free will.
Yeah, it's here we go, fate and free will. I was also going to say that I know. The idea of, or just in this Mother Peace depiction, I think of Father Time also, which is another thing, another name we have for Saturn, right? And the idea of like YOLO, which is kind of like the Pan goat god, which is just like a different way that we think about time, right? So now we think of Father Time as this like oppressive, kind of scary force where the hourglass is ticking, right? Whereas Pan in more pagan cultures or something like this would be like more of a YOLO version of Father Time, like, you know? So, or you only live once version of Father Time. So kind of like making the best out of the materials that you have because they're fleeting and you're just having fun, versus kind of capitalism, capitalizing the experience of material, and like
mining
also
it,
like
other things, you know, like, yeah.
And like time is money, also that kind of saying would apply here. You know, Saturn is time, and we're looking at like the material realm of the devil. So, you know, all those kind of concepts mashed in.
Yep. So let's move on to the Wheel of Fortune, because this is the card of Jupiter, and yeah, it is the kind of counterpart to what we just said the devil was, in that this is fate. You know, the Wheel of Fortune is all about fate. We see here depicted, especially in the middle card, which is the Botticelli deck, the process of being on top of the world, maybe even a ruler, of heading downwards, of being on the bottom, and then of like rising again. You know, this is the wheel of life. This is how things go around. The only constant is change, is something that the Wheel of Fortune can kind of tell us. I also want to say, though, that in combination, we've been talking about this the whole time, so it's not a revelation, but really seeing these two cards, I hope you get the impression of how they fit so well together, the devil and the Wheel of Fortune, where the Wheel of Fortune is expansion and the devil is compression. There's massive amounts of energy generated from that pairing. And again, this is why T. Susan Chang calls it the difference engine. It's modeled after a combustion engine in her chapter on this book, because they're very powerful forces that are coming together to result in a really special card, which is the two.
Yeah, and I wanted to sort of add the idea of, you know, devil gives you all the material pleasures, right? And the Wheel of Fortune is kind of like your lot in life, where it's like, you know, and the idea of both Jupiter and Saturn, like they're both known as kings or like hierarchies, right? And then also Saturn is like the wheel coming down, the poverty, like having no voice, not being heard, and things like that. And Jupiter is just kind of like, it could be both, and it is both, and it's kind of ongoing. And same with Father Time. Father Time is also telling us that that cycle is kind of ongoing. Just like the gates of matter, like they tempt you, but they're also there for your own transcendence in a certain way. Like we're trying to transcend the wheel of samsara in both cards, you know?
Absolutely.
And again, but it also evokes to me a little bit of the fall of Jupiter, because when you're talking about the devil, you're talking about being that shadow side a little bit, and being aware of other people's shadows, or being aware of the general material reality enough that you can integrate it in a way that is favorable to you, that favors your perspective, but being vulnerable also to the dangers of the things that you ignore coming back to bite you in the ass. Because you have the changing of the ever-changing circumstances normally accumulating that which you're ignoring to a point where it overwhelms you in another place of time, in another moment of time.
And I agree, David, because it is the shadow, and it's not, we talk about it like as this hopeful thing, like we could break the binds of samsara or something like that. Most people don't. Most people are caught in materialism, even if they do know that there's a way out or something like this. And
I want to also argue that if you are still alive, you haven't broken the thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is like if we take a spirit into form, it must go through the spheres into matter, right? And if we're doing that, that's why I'm saying like breaking the wheel of samsara has really nothing to do with like this physical life in a way, right? And it's like easier said than done when we are stuck in the realm of matter. Most people, even enlightened, or you know what I'm saying, like even people with like a premonition towards like some spiritualism or something like that, we're still bound, right? We're still bound in material, and we're still bound in this way of the devil. We could easily like take off the chains or whatever, but nobody does, right? Like nobody does. And so that's the idea of the fall of Jupiter here, is there's this wheel that keeps on churning, and there's this material that keeps us grasping, you know?
Yeah, and you strive for justice, but and for stability, or for supportiveness with Jupiter, but with things that keep changing in circumstance, it's hard to keep your perspective intact all the time, and you keep being reminded of your shadow or things you want to avoid because they don't match your initial idea, you know, with the Wheel of Fortune here. So we have to remember that these cards, they are not an exact correspondence. We do that a lot here, especially in our talks. We conflate them a lot, and that's okay. But because we're diving into certain archetypes that are common to these factors, to these elements, but they're not one-on-one correspondences. And I think that whereas Jupiter is this hopeful thing, the Wheel of Fortune is not necessarily hopeful, you know? It is just unstable circumstances sometimes that bring you to confront things that you didn't want to really confront. And that's when it combines, I think, with the devil and the Two of Pentacles, with that lesson of learning how to deal with circumstance in that very material, harsh, cold, fact way. And
I know, I think that that's a very important thing to say, but kind of not disagreeing with what you're going to say, but I guess kind of feeding off of it in a different way. You think about the card that represents Saturn as the co-ruler, or the Decanic Lord, is the World. And you can kind of picture that card in your head, especially with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. We have the ovum around the naked woman figure floating in the middle of the ovum. And here we have the Wheel of Fortune. I think it's very important to actually compare these and like embody these archetypes, about how those two circular motions, those two circles, are essentially moving differently. and the different nature of them. So there is a way in which it is helpful to kind of be, I guess, reductive a little bit when you're thinking about these, to really grasp the meaning, so to speak, and then kind of blow it back up again.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, it is good to understand, or it's good to remember that like the Decanic journey, shall we say, or just the Decans themselves are, deeply Egyptian and Babylonian. And the tarot cards are like much, much, much later in the tradition, and then they're assigned to the Decans. So we're just doing this because it's fun. It's fun to go through the Decanic journey with the 36 faces, but then Austin gives the tarot associations, and then T. Susan sort of elaborates on that. And so it's a really good, it's a good launching point for us to do these like Decanic deep dives or whatever. But
and here we're doing our own mercurial job, right, of circling around the topic to try and bring something up out of it for everyone who watches.
Yeah, very much. It's just like our like natural journey and our just kind of discussions with it. But I think the value of assigning the tarot cards, it's also an old tradition of the tarot cards being assigned here, but we have to remember that the tarot cards came a lot later. And even astrology, the way we practice it in the Hellenistic way, or from the Hellenistic era, is also a little bit older than the Decanic schema as well. So we're kind of layering and associating like after the fact onto these what are Egyptian decans. So it's good to keep in mind. But I think it does build a narrative and a story that's kind of like valuable and like art, almost like an art, like an artistic sort of rendition of how we can build these themes and images with one another. But yeah, it's not a one-on-one association. Like, yeah, it's good to remember.
The last thing that I want to say before we move on to the Two of Coins, the minor arcana card for this decan, is on the far left we have the traditional tarot deck, which is the Tarot of Marseille. It's kind of a different numbering mechanism and some really, really old imagery in these cards. And there is going to be a very important one that I bring up when we show the Two of Coins, but that depiction of the Wheel of Fortune on the left is a little bit interesting. It has the wheel that is the same sort of message of people rise and people fall. But to me, at least, and in other depictions of the Wheel of Fortune, this looks a little bit like a game, like the game of roulette. It's a game of chance. And there is this element, you see the riches falling out of the side of the king's throne, and the fox gobbling it up. There is like a winner take all sort of situation. And if you relate that to the devil too, we see the addiction of money, the addiction of wealth, which is something that can be Jupiter and Saturn sign.
Yeah, was that in the I'm looking right now to see if that was where if that was in T. Susan. But the idea of roulette and Russian roulette being called the devil's game or whatever.
Game.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's, interesting that you bring that up. Like,
totally.
Was that in T. Susan's book?
Yeah, she mentioned the combination of the Wheel of Fortune and the devil being like the devil's game. And
yes.
But yeah, so that's the Wheel of Fortune. So now let's go to the Two of Coins. Now
the by the way, the how do you say it? The soundtrack for this particular episode can be Russian Roulette by Rihanna. Y'all can go and search that.
I'll link it below.
Please do.
Please do.
Have it in the background as we're listening.
There are some people from Gen Z that don't know it because they were too young to listen to it when it came.
It's very sad.
It's like Rihanna's like old track or like deep
oh God.
Oh man.
Okay, the Two of Pentacles, the Lord of Harmonious Change, often talked about as the Lord of Change, but I think the way that the Hermetic deck names them, sometimes it offers a nuance, right? Because it could just be like the Lord of change, right? But it's not. It's the Lord of harmonious change. So I think that speaks to that like Jupiterian quality, and also like what David was talking about, like when you have to like give something up or make a change, it's kind of like exciting or kind of like new or like quote unquote groundbreaking or something, like on a new journey. So we've got change here, but it's just noted that it is harmonious.
Yeah, it's like in balance. It kind of looks like it's in balance here in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, And so I think sometimes, I don't really know if I've read it this way very often in actual readings, but it can be the idea of juggling a lot of plates or like, managing a lot of different things at once, which is true, but there's like a harmonious element to it that's not necessarily like somebody's super stressed and about to crash. It's more like they're managing, and the plates are spinning.
Yeah, sometimes I think about it.
And the ideas of the waves on the card of the Rider-Waite also being so high and low with the ships going through them has that idea of navigating circumstance. And you have to trust the sea and the boat. You have to be like, yeah, it's shaky. Yeah, it seems like it's going to topple, but it's not. It's fine. If you're the captain, you're just going to be like, yeah, it's fine. If it's not, we're dead, but then we'll worry about it then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes when I'm interpreting the card, like in a tarot reading, I'm not sure if this is going to add that much to this decanic image of it. But when I'm reading it, I'll think of it as like a jack of all trades. Or like, I get this card too, and I like have many different hats that I wear. Speaking of the hat on the guy is like quite prominent. But it's like you might be, in order to be an astrologer, I've had to be a YouTuber. In order to be a YouTuber, I've had to learn how to edit. In order, so there's like these chains of different things that you can do. It could be someone that has two different jobs, a day job and a night job. It could be an artist that has like one that makes money and one that satisfies their creative endeavors or something like this. And sometimes I think of maybe, when I'm thinking according to this decan is like the stability of Saturn and then the creativity of Jupiter, right? And them kind of like weaving together in, and I like, and hopefully we can cover what T. Susan talks about with the pulley here, which I think is really interesting. But she mentions about the whirling dervishes. And when I think about the Sufis, and the way that they sort of interpret God is like this very like dripping and poetic kind of, when I think of the coins moving or the waves moving or the wheel of fortune churning or something like this, I very much think like the idea of the Sufi poetry and the Sufi whirling dervishes and things like this embody that nature really, really well.
Well, you think also about Saturnian things like seafaring or being a sailor, being a sea captain or whatever. That's very Saturnian. And think about the farmer as well, another Saturnian endeavor, another Saturnian profession. Yes. You have to really trust the elements, but you have an intuitive side to your nature that is like you made yourself one with the elements to the point where when a storm is coming and you know how to prepare for it. You know the speed of the wind and what it indicates. You know the form of the clouds and what it indicates. You know everything, the stars. So you become one with the environment itself to be able to execute one particular task. Jupiter is all-encompassing. Jupiter knows everything in that way. It wants to know everything in that way and behold everything. But Saturn exacts one particular task, so, and those tasks that take a long time, that take a lot of knowledge and that you have to trust the elements.
And you're making me think too of like, if you're thinking about seafaring or water trade and you're thinking about agriculture, you're thinking about like undesirable places to work, right? And also like poverty stricken kind of professions, or very humble to say the least.
And disease spreading.
Yeah, right. But also like that's what all wealth essentially is built from is like agriculture and sea trade, right? So it's like you've got this sort of like undesirable outcast of the farmer or the seafarer, and they were just known to be like, you know, clad in tattered clothes and things like this. But at the same time, you know, you have those things as the basis for wealth, the kind of like starting points for wealth, which we see in the two. And then also one thing I wanted to note about this guy that looks kind of like jovial or happy, throughout time, it's been like laborers and like hard workers that are paid too little that usually know how to like have a sense of humor and drink and be merry and have fun or something like this, right? It's like despite the poverty, like a lot of people talk about that. Like they'll be like, I'm from the first world nation, you know, and I go over to wherever and I see the people are so happy that they don't even have shoes. Like, how can that be, you know?
It's called like, avoidance, Jane.
And not just that, but it's a cultivating of like a jovial spirit despite circumstances as well. Like you can know how to really appreciate the small things in life and I guess have fun despite the oppression, which I think is kind of a Jupiter Saturn thing, is like if you're being oppressed or, you know, doing all the work that nobody else wants to do or getting paid too little for very dangerous and laborious work, what else can you do at some point but give up and kind of have a sense of humor and kind of like just have fun with your friends and family when you get that 1 hour off or something like that, you know? So I
really like the depiction of those satyrs in that.
Yeah, I really want to talk about some of the other symbols in these cards, if that's okay, because you know, honestly, the Rider-Waite-Smith one is one of the least interesting ones that I saw when I was going through these, and almost like too literal. Although I do want to mention that hat for a moment because that's a very phallic symbol, which I think goes back to the devil a little bit. So there's a relation between those two cards to ponder.
And didn't T. Susan talk about it being reminiscent of the grave?
Oh yeah, a tombstone. Like of a tombstone, which I thought was interesting. That's not the first thing that popped into my mind, but I might have a filter, so that's fine. So next to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is another card from a traditional Tarot of Marseille deck that I have. And this is a super distinctive card because just like many other tarot decks where there are not specific images for each minor arcana card, it's usually just the number of the elemental signifier. So like 2 swords, 2 wands, 2 cups. But here, in place of 2 coins, or with the 2 coins, you have a ribbon that's wrapping around both of those 2 coins. And this gets into the kind of pulley situation that I am not going to do justice to because physics is not my strong suit. But the 2 wheels going in an opposite direction, we think about the wheel of fortune and the wheel of the worlds, like the circle ovum thing. Best depicted though here in the 2 of Pentacles from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Those circles are spinning in opposite directions, and it keeps things of such a tension that it's able to kind of sustain itself. It's able to, you know, as we were talking about, the spinning plate staying in the air. And so this depiction is very interesting and unique among other minor arcana cards in this traditional tarot deck for depicting this. And as a result, it has a very specific meaning, or it especially used to have a very specific meaning, which Chang mentions in her book of the reversal of fortune. Just straight up, that's what this card means when somebody would get it in a reading, is a reversal of fortune. For that reason, you know, the turning of the wheel, and the only constant is change. But I just like gasped when I saw the 2 of Pentacles from the Botticelli deck with the little satyrs. Am I saying that? Satyrs?
Satyrs.
Saying that wrong. With the little satyrs.
Beautiful depiction.
It's such a beautiful depiction because you definitely get more of the like cute vibe from these satyrs than you would the devil, right? That's what the devil's based off of. Those little guys hanging out there with the coins.
And the panpipes, it was like a musical kind of like jovial
Look at that little guy holding it looks like a lance of some sort for jousting that's like 4 times the size of him and everything. And they're blowing on the horn. And yeah, it's a great image. And I think a really interesting way to see the linkages between the Two of Pentacles and the Devil. And then in the Scapini deck on the far right, again, this was yet another one where I actually had very little understanding of this before I tried to dive deep and what this means, essentially, what's being recalled in the image of the Two of Coins from the Scapini deck. You see the woman half naked there, like gazing in the mirror, but then you see some like creepy old men peeking behind and over the coins at her. And this is a reference to a myth called, it's of Susanna, who's the woman, and the two elders. This is a biblical myth, I guess, a biblical story about how this was a young married woman who was bathing, and her housekeepers let in these two gentlemen, and they spied on her, and they wanted to kind of blackmail or extort her into giving them sexual favors because they had seen her naked. And since they were elders, they were going to be believed over her, a young female, because this is also, whatever. But and said that they would accuse her of adultery if she tried to reveal that that she had been spied upon. But she refused to do so. She refused to say that, she was adulterous. She refused them the sexual favors. And the only way that these two elderly men were found out and Susanna's honor was saved was because a wise man came and made both of the elderly men tell their story of what happened, and they didn't match at all. So it was like hearing both sides of the equation, they were able to arrive at the truth, which really speaks to this duality piece that we hear in a lot of other discussions of the Two of Pentacles. There being a few different ways that things could go. There being oppositions. We have the old men and the young, beautiful woman. And so it's kind of a cautionary tale of I guess, yeah, be careful what you're doing, how you're using your earthly desires, and how you're using your power. When we go back to the emperor and the hierarchy and patriarchy and everything, be careful how you're using that, because you can end up on the bottom, even if you find yourself in a relatively high ranking in society.
Unfortunately, too classic of a story, but just like the idea of like two sides to the same coin, I think could be noted here, because you've got like that again, that both on the dating Saturn and Jupiter, but you can look at it from a negative light, or you can look at it from a positive light, depending on how your like fate is turning, or how the wheel is spinning, or like that change of fate. So yeah, that.
And Asclepius is on that top coin as well. You got the symbol of Asclepius, the rod with the snakes wrapped around it. Beautiful. Okay, and then these are the last two tarot cards that I had that I wanted to share. We have here on the left the science deck, which is always a lovely depiction from scientific theories of the tarot card meaning. And here we have antimatter. Antimatter is a substance that is the opposite of matter in the universe. Now, we've been talking about materials this whole time and bringing things down from spirit into matter. And so I think it's particularly appropriate from that perspective. But also, when matter and antimatter come together, they meet in shared annihilation. They cancel each other out in such a catastrophic way that it's a reminder to weigh the opportunity with the risk. Also very similar to that last card that we were talking about.
And totally and 1,000% what Jupiter and Saturn kind of do, right? Is like cancel each other out and make some kind of like a balanced, nuanced like moment in like responsibility and things like this, as both being on the day team and the graders, like they're really kind of the great equalizers kind of a thing, Yeah.
And finally, the Mother Peace deck on the right is showing us, it's also very similar to the wheels rotating that we saw in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and the pulley imagery that T. Susan Chang discussed in her chapter. It's very, very much of that duality piece with the woman holding the two twins, and Yeah, you could really see this card. I mean, if I were reading a deck, reading with this deck for somebody and they got this card, I could see it being a lot more prominent. The idea of holding on to a lot of things at once, taking a lot of responsibility, and also being able to, within yourself, contain opposites and duality.
Yeah, and again, you have the snake, you have the wheels representing the elements, and like also when we see the twins, we see the lovers, we see Gemini, right? We see that kind of duality coming through as well. And like multitasking, like this could definitely, like a mother with two babies, one on each breast, is definitely like having to be, again, that jack of all trades kind of vibe, where it's just like you have to have your hands in two different pots at once to kind of make the thing go, which you could feel in the material realm very much. Like you can feel that in the Devil card, you can feel that in the Wheel of Fortune. It's kind of.
I wanted to comment just that you have to be made aware of your unconscious side, and you are constantly. There are moments like when the Two of Coins comes up, where life is trying to make you more aware of something that you have accumulated in the shadows that is impeding the progress that you're trying to achieve right now. It might not have been a problem before. It might not ever be a problem again. It is a problem now that you need to face and integrate into your consciousness, that it exists, a facet of yourself. And there are innumerous facets of yourself that you're going to discover throughout your life, and many others that you won't, that were always there, but you're going to die oblivious about. But the Two of Coins, specifically when it comes up in a reading, as some of you, one of you were saying, I think you, Elsa, or you, Katie, I don't know, couldn't have been anyone else, the reversal of fortune, right? When it came up in a reading in a previous, in the ancient times, whatever. It would be this, it would be representing what, when you apply a certain material routine, when you try to do a particular ritual, if you get a dissonant feedback, you will be aware that there is a difference. You know, there is something not matching between what you were expecting and the way you enacted it. So you have to change either your perspective, the way you are enacting it, or there's something blocking your way that you have to be made aware of, that because you didn't have the tools before, you can't see.
Yeah, it's about uncertainty, being okay with moving forward in uncertainty. And that's something else that T. Susan Chang brings up in her book, that just like the Eight of Wands is a good talisman for having something arrive unharmed via the post or a message of some sort, this is a really good one for moving forward or accepting the outcome in uncertainty. It's a good talismanic card to use for that sort of purpose.
You know, and when
like the captain of a ship.
Yeah, there you go.
And when you guys are speaking and just thinking about antimatter, and we have like the Lord of the Gates of Matter, right? Like literally the devil is about matter, and this is like antimatter, and you're talking about canceling each other out. It's like when we're doing trading and bargains and stuff like that, it's like the idea is to, get one leg up. Like you're just starting with a measly little 2 coins, right? And you're going to try to make a trade or make a barter or make a plan or whatever to get yourself one rung up to the 3 or something like this, right? But a lot of times when we're sort of like shifting between like matter and spirituality or something like this, Jupiter and Saturn, something like this, we end up doing things that cancel each other out and just have us on this like wheel, right? That it's just like we actually didn't make any gains. So if you think of like Saturn as like dieting and restriction, and Jupiter is like cheat days or something like this, right? You get sort of this like canceling out thing a lot of the time with this sort of wheel that you're on, or this sort of like material realm of, it is hard to sort of like get a leg up. And yes, they're balancing forces, and yes, they're like polarizing forces, but also like the idea of the Two of Pentacles is to like diversify and make a deal and like come up on the come up on the bright side of that or come up on the winning side of that or whatever. And same with Wheel of Fortune. It is very uncertain, but the idea is that hopefully your luck is changing for the better. Like a lot of people do have a little gleam in their eyes when they see Wheel of Fortune, as opposed to maybe the devil. Maybe some of us get our gleam in our eyes when we pick the devil card, but you know, so just that kind of idea of the come up or something, and the idea of like polarizing forces, like kind of canceling each other out, that just keep you on this constant wheel.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, it reminds me of a saying my grandmother used to say, "Stop the world, I want to get off." Obviously she's saying that, like kind of just a phrase, right, that you say when you say you're tired. But can you just see how perfect that is for like the Wheel of Fortune and Saturn? It's just like goes on and on and on, and you can't stop it. It just doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. Stop the wheel, I want to get off. Kind of perfect for this little decanic journey.
Indeed.
So shall we go over nativities real quick? I have just a few minutes before I have to go. Unfortunately, sorry guys, again, to cut the nativities a little bit short, but is there anybody that you feel that you really want to exemplify from our celebrities and nativities this time, you guys? I was thinking, for me personally, Jared Leto really like pops off here,
There are a couple people who I feel like have been like titans of some sort that have nativities, their natal sons here, including Stan Lee, who was a famous comic book creator, LeBron James, super, super successful basketball player. Didn't he have, at least at the time, one of the most largest contracts ever?
Yeah, he's still a legend. He's still completely a legend in this.
Do you know who else is a legend who has birthday on this particular decan?
John Legend?
Jesus. No, I'm just
but yes, Jesus. Yeah, a very popular nativity.
Very popular nativity.
And then we've got Denzel Washington.
Ryan Seacrest.
Oh yeah, Ryan Seacrest.
The Empire, like.
And isn't Jude Law the actor that's in that Pope thing that just is out, which I think is kind of interesting.
That is interesting. So sacrilege. I love it.
Val Kilmer, who plays Jim Morrison, who we saw in the last Decan. Taye Diggs.
Eddie Vedder is a great one. He's the lead singer of Pearl Jam. For the Gen Xers in the room.
Llewyn Tomlinson is in One Direction.
It's a band, okay? Pearl Jam is a band in old, what do you call that? When you have the radio that plays like the old music, what is that called? Yeah, you'll hear it on the oldies station.
My heart.
And in the list here, I see Llewyn Tomlinson as in Harry Styles' boyfriend.
So. All right, y'all. Well, that is a fun little list. I don't have a lot to elaborate on today with the list, but you can kind of see some of these nativities personifying the Decan, especially our Lord of Hosts.
The Lord of Hosts. I don't have anything to say.
Okay. All right, with that, Capricorns, we kick off our first Decan of Capricorn. We'll see you next time for Decan 2 of Capricorn. And
It's my birthday, so please, you better show up.
Join us. We'll have a little celebratory moment for David's birthday. It's going to be a fun one. So, David, we can find you at inthefirstplaceastrology.com.
Yes, you can look for me for tutorings. You can look for me for readings, tarot as well. It's all there. You can just hit me up.
A perfect time for gifting reading to a loved one. And KD, we can find you at kddayton.com.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. And you can find me in the About section, as well as just reach out to me directly. You can leave donations. Actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this. You can find all of our projects over on the Hellenistic Astrology Patreon. You can also find a link below to give a one-time donation via PayPal. So yeah, and then also you can book readings with any of us at any time. So I hope you all have a happy holiday and a happy new year.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment this video and share with your loved ones, because after all, it's Christmas.
Completely. And it's definitely a gift for us. We'd like to make it to 300 and do those little bonus sessions. It would be fun to do that around the holidays. So thank you all who have subscribed and who have followed so far, and keep them coming. All right, the poem, shall we? This poem this time was really incredible. When I was reading it, I was like, oh, I want to ask Katie to read it. And then I'm like, oh, she does such a good job. So let's go ahead and dive in. This one's a real treat, I felt like.
Take it away, Katie.
All right, I will. It's called A Dream by May Swenson. I was a god and self-enchanted. I stood in a cabinet in the living wood. The doors were carved with the sign of the lizard, whose eye unblinks on emptiness, whose head turns slower than a tooth grows. I wore a mask of skin-thin silver. My hair was frenzied foam, stiffened to ice. My feet, gloved in petals of imperishable flowers, were hoofs and colder than hammers. I lived by magic. A little bag in my chest held a whirling stone, so hot it was past burning, so radiant it was blinding. When the moon rose, worn and broken, her face like a coin endlessly exchanged in the hands of the sea, her ray fell upon the doors which opened, and I walked in the living wood. The leaves turned to bronze and the moss to marble. At morning I came back to my cabinet. It was a tree in the daylight, the lizard a scroll of its bark.
Matao kako bersama yo demikian soba da soba kena matahi bang nakau di mawa demikian soba en soba atai banake ujuna baikana kamaya da ongai esa Your Majesty, Matai bekana sabaso inakina tabaine to you guys imbai toma what the bike you know makano yo sono mia bagomina che voglio cogliere con me go poi io non la conosco sono mia bagomina tomato tomato